Hey, good morning. What's happening out there? Robert Phoenix with you again. Another morning, another day in the neighborhood. Broadcasting to you live from Austin, Texas. It is the 21st of September in the year 2017, the year of our Lord. Does anybody use that expression anymore, the year of our Lord? I don't think so. Not unless the Lord is Satan! Sorry, I had to get that out. You know, sometimes it's good to clear the pipes, although I think I just blew my mic out here because I'm not getting any levels. Oh, here we go. One more. Hello, hello, hello. Hello. All right. This is the aftermath of the Trump speech, apparently. Unless you are a rabid, frothing Zionist, I would say that that speech left you a little bewildered. And more than bewildered, General Kelly, his reaction is priceless, absolutely priceless. But look, Trump's got to dump this guy. Apparently Kelly voted for Hillary Clinton. Yep, he had voted for Hillary Clinton. This is what was communicated to Lou Dobbs by Ed Rollins. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. You know, Trump is the chaos bomb. He's the chaos candidate chaos. And his UN speech was a lot like his Art of the Deal. You go in and you throw some hand grenades and you watch everybody scramble. And then you get to kind of pick them off one by one, which is what he did in the run-up to the election. That was exactly what he did. He was running the Art of the Deal the whole time while he was being ultimately carried on the shoulders of the people to become elected as the President of the United States. And he'd throw those chaos bombs into the debates and into his press conferences and into his speeches. It was, if you haven't seen the Steve Bannon interview with Charlie Rose, I highly recommend it. Not just because you'll get a glimpse into the mind of Steve Bannon, but you'll get some behind the scenes insight into the Trump campaign. And it's really fascinating because Bannon talks about it in very explicit terms and where the campaign was headed, and they had suffered losses and some of the primaries, and delegates were starting to get moved around. And it was through Bannon and Kellyanne Conway who got Trump back on message and back on point, and started hammering the mandate that theoretically the American people have wanted, or at least a portion of the American people have wanted for a while, which was less spending in the government, less taxes, less people freely roaming across the border, and a major overhaul of the medical program known as Obamacare. Those were the four core issues. Now, if you threw in the TTIP, and climate change, NAFTA, that was frosting on the cake. Frosting on the cake. And I think Trump's biggest crime to this date wasn't a speech where he was chomping at the bit and threatening Iran and threatening Venezuela, threatening North Korea, threatening Djibouti. No, that was not it, although some people will certainly take affront to it in a big way, and to some degree, they probably should. I mean, it was not meant to be a diplomatic bromide for the masses or even the select few. It was the art of the deal. No, Trump's biggest mistake, I wouldn't say biggest mistake, it's not a mistake. His biggest crime, the most venal sin that he created, was to remove the United States from the TTIP, or the TTP. That was the biggest mistake there was for him. Not mistake. It's not a mistake. I have to correct myself. That was the biggest sin he waged against the globalists, because that was their linchpin. Once they had the TTP in place, the TTP would have connected NAFTA, GATT, it would have been all together. And so what we would have had is basically a band that would have stretched from, this would have been excluding China, by the way, because they were not part of the TPP. But it was countries like Chile and Peru and Australia and Thailand and the Philippines. I mean, all these, in Japan, I believe Japan was part of this, the TPP as well. Korea was in there. So the whole idea was that for that band to stretch from essentially the Pacific Rim to the western part of South America, Central America, the United States, Canada, Mexico, all the way to Europe, stretching basically as far as the European Union, because that's where GATT ends. So essentially, the trade agreement would have walled in Russia. Do you see where this is going? It would have walled in Russia. So when Trump decided to pull the plug on the TPP, the globalists were furious, absolutely furious. They had spent years working on this thing, years, millions of dollars. And by the way, I did the chart for TPP, and they tried to get it off the ground during the Mercury retrograde. They should know better. They should know better when it comes to these things. I'm still surprised that Obamacare is staggering around, because it was passed on a Mercury retrograde. They voted for it on a Mercury retrograde. It's coming up again. It doesn't look good. It doesn't look like it's going to be defeated, repealed, overhauled, whatever you want to add into that mix. But we'll see, because the ghost, the phantasm of Mercury retrograde is still in the background of Obamacare, and clearly it made a difference on the TPP, and that's why Trump. It's kind of like when Jimmy Carter came into the White House and got rid of all the excess CIA dreck. And once that happened, boy, the CIA was pissed off at Jimmy Carter. So Jimmy Carter's life was made hell from that point forward, and had to, again, pay the wages of sin, which at that time was a country called Iran. Which brings us to our current point in time, and Trump's very pointed and aggressive speech in the UN towards countries like North Korea, Venezuela, and Iran. I'm not a big fan of intervention. I've stated that clearly yesterday, and I've stated it before. So even if it is merely another kind of art of the deal moment that Trump is throwing out there with the aid of Stephen Miller and that fiery speech, it remains to be seen. But one of my readers / listeners / followers had something really interesting to say. That there's basically two Irans. There are two Irans. There are the people who live there, and then there is the government, which is a Islamic, it's a very strict Islamic government, which we, by the way, helped put into place. So it's always funny to look at and have to deal with the ramifications and the manifestations of the things and the choices and the decisions that we made. We deposed the Shah. We deposed him because this is what happens with these leaders. They get these resources like oil or whatever's putting the country together, feeding the country, fueling the country. In this case, it was oil. In the case of Noriega, it was cocaine. So the Shah got it into his head that he was actually really the ruler of Iran. Can you imagine that? And of course, he was placed there because they replaced Mossadegh. And Mossadegh was another one of these guys who had this uppity notion that he was the actual ruler of the country. My God. Well, both of them learned a lesson in who really runs the world and runs their country. Standard Oil, the Seven Sisters, and their proxies said, no, you don't run this country. You don't run it. You're out of here. All of your culture, all of your pomp, all of your circumstance, all of your libertarian ways. I mean, Iran before the Shah is actually rising. It's becoming this kind of, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, the Shah had a nasty side. All rulers, all kings, all monarchs, excuse me, they all have a nasty side. You know, you don't get into power without being, you know, a borderline sociopath. I mean, that's just the way it is. And sometimes it's even beyond borderline. Sometimes you're a full-blown sociopath and you grab it. Do you think that these leaders of the world, unless they're completely compromised and are what we would call a power bottom, do you really think that that they just kind of get by in their instincts and education and wits, guile, and will? No, of course not. They're either deeply compromised or they take what they are given. So the Shah had a nasty side. What was his secret service? Was the Savak? Is that what it was? Anyway, you know, if there were people who didn't like what he said or decided they wanted to do maybe a communist, socialist end around, you know, he'd find out about it, and you know, boy, they would be dispatched rather quickly because they didn't want any encouragement. It's like, do you want to give people an inch when they want to burn things down and have their own regime put in? Generally speaking, no. This is the one thing that people don't understand about monarchies and dictatorships, that that any kind of dissidence, whether it's warranted or not, will not be tolerated under those circumstances. Then at some point, that program will be global, worldwide. Hopefully not. Let's hold that space, but there is the potential for that. Okay, so the Shah gets deposed because Iran at that time was incredible. You know, just before he gets the boot up the bum, Iran was amazing. The Shah championed women's rights. It was not an Islamic state. It wasn't a democracy because you had the Shah, right? He's the king. But it also was not a theocracy, which is what it's become. And they had these great festivals. I was at one point in time I was pretty good friends with Susan Dehim, who's a singer, and she was a childhood star in Iran and went on to study arts and music and film and cinema in Paris with a lot of interesting people, the Living Theater and all that stuff, Maurice Béjart. So Susan she would tell me about what it was like in Iran. And it wasn't perfect. There is no perfection. There is no utopia. But the amount of education, the amount of cultural enrichment, and generally overall prosperity was probably a bit too much for the rulers of the world. And they've been chipping away at Iran for a long time. Of course, Iraq and Iran had a war going on with each other back in the 80s, and that was partially due to the U.S. funding Saddam Hussein to take on the Iranians. So Mossadegh the Shah got replaced by the Ayatollah, and we've had a theocratic state ever since then. But a lot of the people in Iran, are still kind of holdovers, or sons and daughters of people raised during that time, where it was more of a benign oligarchy, I guess, a benign plutocracy, more or less benign. And so there's still memories and echoes, and there's sentiments from a period where the people in Iran were more free. But we put the Shah of Iran, the Ayatollah, into power in Iran. We put the Shah in power too. So we created that. The United States, MI6, French Secret Service, because the Ayatollah was hanging out in Paris, and he was a minor figure. He was a minor theocratical figure, and then very, very quickly there was an insurgence that took place. And what's really interesting about the overthrow of the Shah was that, of course, these resistance cells, which had been there and had been put under wraps for a long time by the Shah, all of a sudden started to get things like weapons and all kinds of interesting tools that they could use to move the people, and eventually, in that vacuum and in that void, bring in the Ayatollah. And it didn't take a lot, right? So you've got to keep this in your mind, that when Iran went through the regime change and theoretically the reign of the Shah fell, the numbers of people that were actually driving that revolution were not huge compared to the entire populace. I don't have the figures straight, right at my fingertips, but I guarantee you it was not like, hey, 100%, we want to flip this script. It was a small percentage which had the backing of the military, which is very important at one point. If you go and look at what happened with Cuba, look what happened with Cuba. Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, they basically launched their revolution from Mexico, which is where they were stationed and being trained by the CIA and others, so that they could go into Cuba and overthrow it. And it didn't take many. Did not take a lot of freedom fighters to overthrow a government and an army. It happened very quickly, without much of a fuss and without much of a fight. So just keep that in mind, because sometimes this notion of revolution and regime change, people tend to think, oh my God, it's got to be a wave and a mass of people. It doesn't really have to happen in that way. I don't know what the magic number is, and I'm certainly not promoting it to that extent, but it's not always a huge and overwhelming number. It can be a very concentrated and potent force that strikes at a period of time when it is kind of at the highest level of hysteria and chaos. I am looking at February, of course, for when this might actually occur in this country. Because as we know, manufacturers are pretty greedy. And they love Christmas. They love to sell things. Well, they want money in their pockets. So I'm not, even though we've got another eclipse coming up, I don't think anything drastic will happen between now and Christmas, only because of a financial investment in that time. Okay, let's keep that in mind. But after Christmas, it is open season, and we've seen in the past, during the Obama administration, the color revolutions that took place during that time. And even before then, before Obama, pre-Obama, the color revolutions that took place generally happened on or around the sign of Aquarius, which is February. So just take your magic marker and put a big circle in February. And the reason why we also looked at February is because what's the opposite sign of Aquarius? It's Leo. Where did we have the eclipse? That's right, we had it at 28 Leo, so it would be opposite sign 28 Aquarius. And even before that, we had the event in Charlottesville, which was a Leo event. So we're looking at the mirror, or the reflection of those events through time, and the manifestation of those events in opposite sign. And in Aquarius, it's all about radical rebellion, energy, kill the king. So keep your eye on February. Anyway, so the fallout of the speech is reverberating around the world. It might have been one of the more controversial speeches of all time, to be quite honest with you. You know, when public figures and autocrats, politicians speak, they're actually taught to speak at a fairly high level, and what they're communicating clearly is a message. Like if you go back and you listen to some of Obama's speeches, like when Obama was talking about globalism versus nationalism, and if you go back and you listen to Obama's speeches, I mean, there are things that are being very clearly laid out. But the way that the speeches were written is that, I wouldn't say that the script was codified, but it was not delivered, not written and delivered in the language of the people, the vox populi. So you have to kind of sift through the syntax. And also the way that most politicians deliver speeches is not one of roaring rhetoric and bombastic blasts of energy. No, it's generally at a slightly higher than monotone level. And why is that? Because what they're trying to do, if you're listening and paying attention, is there is a rhythmic application to the speech and the intonation that puts you in a trance. There are massive documents about Obama and NLP. Obama using NLP. And I believe Trump uses it too. I think Trump's been trained in NLP. Trump is no dummy. He's got tools in his toolkit. Just ask Scott Adams. But that's why the speeches kind of follow this slightly just above monotone kind of rhythmic pattern and delivery, because there's an entrancement quality that comes with the speech. So they get you into a state and they tell you what they're going to do. But you have to pay attention and really listen and read between the lines, or at least be awake enough to understand what's being communicated. That's not the case with Trump. Trump is the vox populi, or theoretically stands for the vox populi. And what's interesting now, of course, is his ratings have gone up since he's taken on Iran. You know, this is all, the ratings are like the stock market. They're manipulated. If Trump plays the globalist game, if he kowtows to, you know, our friends in the Middle East and bangs the drum and raises his fist for the same issues and the same stratagems, then the approval meter goes up. If Trump stubbornly clings to the notion of nationalism and retreat from global affairs, flirts with isolationism, his numbers go down. And that's the bottom line. That's the Pavlovian effect. And with Leo rising and Mars on the ascendant, look, this guy's got Mars on the ascendant. Are you surprised that we're talking about war? Are you surprised about the dramatic expression of his persona? No. It's right there in the chart. And are you surprised, or is even he surprised at the fact that people have drawn lines and drawn sides and have taken him on? He shouldn't be, not with Mars on the ascendant in Leo. That's for damn sure. So he was rewarded. His leonine persona, which loves to be loved and respected, was rewarded. His ratings go up. Ooh, we like that. That's a feel-good moment. And of course, Kelly and the middle-of-the-road globalists hate it. They look at him with his head in his hand as priceless. If you're Trump, you gotta say, I got that guy, right? I mean, I got that guy. He took away my bodyguard. Apparently, what's his name? Keith Schiller, the bodyguard of Trump, got dismissed by Kelly because Schiller gave Trump an article or something to look at, and Schiller didn't like that. He wants to eliminate all the outside influences coming into the White House that might just infect Trump's feeble little mind. So here we are, post-UN speech, and everybody's running around picking up the pieces. The chaos grenade has been dropped. Well, sometimes we go from chaos to order. Ordo ab chao. And one of the things that we're going to be dealing with very quickly, this is what I talked about last weekend in Houston, is the application of biometric technology in order to, guess what, transact. So I wanted to give you a little taste, a tiny taste of what's coming. So this is from the website Activist Post, and it is a story. It just hit yesterday, and the story is UK supermarket. What is this? Oh, you gotta be kidding. Hold on one second here. Hold on. You know, this new technology where they run the ads on the side and they jack up the volume. It's just, the internet's just becoming a nightmare to navigate. Anyway, okay. UK supermarket becomes world's first to offer cashless checkout with finger vein scan. Okay, this is not an RFID chip. This is a finger vein scan. This is by Nicholas West. I'm just going to read you a couple of paragraphs. The march toward a cashless society has now moved from the theoretical to the phase of widespread adoption. This is primarily due to developments in the tech sector that now enable the easy use of biometric recognition systems, as well as the increasing acceptance from a public who's becoming familiar with turning themselves into a password for their personal devices. Behind the scenes, governments and corporations have been building the political and economic enticements via the Better Than Cash Alliance to ensure that the world eventually gets decashed. We are now witnessing the full rollout of an architecture that has been in development for many years. China's high-tech KFC recently made headlines and began testing facial recognition payments in its K-Pro store. Cashless agenda denialists, however, could readily point to China's authoritarian government to ease any fears about an impending technocratic takeover occurring in the supposedly more democratic West. Well, today's cashless agenda news does come from the West, and it's a world's first. As reported by The Telegraph, London's cost-cutter supermarket has announced that its shoppers can now pay by finger vein scan. It works by using infrared to scan people's finger veins and then links them to this unique biometric map to their bank cards. Customers' bank details are then stored with payment provider WorldPay in the same way you can store your card details when shopping online. Let me read that again. It works by using infrared to scan people's finger veins and then links this unique biometric map, because apparently not everybody has the same finger vein network, to their bank cards. So this is like blood, right? The finger vein, now they're not taking blood, but it is linked to blood. Your blood. This is blood money. Customers' bank details are then stored with payment provider WorldPay in the same way you can store your card details when shopping online. Shoppers can then turn up to the supermarket with nothing on them but their own hands and use it to make payments in just 3 seconds. Now, perhaps this is better than the biometric chip. If you're going to take one evil, choose one evil over the other, perhaps the finger vein scan is the less invasive of the two. And can they shut you off and keep you from transacting by your finger vein scan versus the chip, which they can just shut off remotely? Well, I think the answer is yes, believe it or not, even if they don't have the ability to disable a piece of technology in your body. They can simply disable your account to WorldPay. So the next time you run your finger over the scanner, you'll get no go, right? So anything that's centralized, anything that's completely centralized. And the thing about cash is for the most part pretty decentralized. Like there are little things like there are RFID strips in your money. If you look closely enough, it's in there. When you go to a Walmart, guess what happens when you go to a Walmart? When you walk through, they scan your money. They know how much money you have when you go into a Walmart because they have dollar readers, dollar sensors as you walk into Walmart. Okay, so let's keep going here on this one. It says, longtime readers of Activist Post might remember an article by Brandon Tuberville written in 2011 warning that this was being tested as a future payment system, remarking at the time about how smartphone payments would eventually seem outdated. He explained, this is what he wrote, taking the cashless control grid one step further, an article published on August 8, 2011, in Technology Review, entitled Beyond Cell Phone Wallets, Biometrics Promise Truly Wallet-Free Future, explains that the major corporations are not even waiting for the digital wallet to catch on. They are actually moving forward with a system that will allow an individual to swipe their palm, not their phone, in front of a digital recognition device in order to gain access to various buildings, pay for merchandise, or otherwise identify oneself. Indeed, this new technology, even this specific product, is already being introduced all over the United States. For instance, New York University's Langone Medical Center has already implemented the vein scanners in some of its medical facilities. Manufactured by Fujitsu, the scanners are being placed in the hospital under the guise of greater convenience. You know, convenience is the Antichrist. Just keep that in mind. Convenience is the Antichrist. The marketing gift that keeps on giving. And faster access to medical records. Convenience, efficiency, security. Convenience, efficiency, security. You're safer, it's faster, it's more convenient. Go ahead, do it. Everybody else is. You can do it too. It's so easy. So easy. You just relax into it. That's it. Get that scanned, baby. Scan it up. Health histories, insurance forms, and other documents are all handled electronically and at a much faster pace with the help of the new vein scanners. Schools too. Hey, schools, of course, our children must be indoctrinated at an early age with the new technology. You know, my son, this is a bit of a departure, but when my son does homework now, where does he go? He doesn't go into his computer and actually write something up. He goes into the cloud. He goes into the school district cloud where he can work on all of his assignments. He doesn't own that. He doesn't own that digital space on his computer. Right? There's no app that you download. There's no program you download, and you've got it physically on your computer and you work it on your computer, then you upload. No. This is all cloud computing, and whether it's meant to do so or not, indoctrinates people who use it into, guess what, not owning anything. Everything exists in some kind of etheric manifestation that we can just magically pull down at any given point in time. Okay, here. Schools, too, have begun to implement the Fujitsu system. For instance, the Pinellas County School District in Florida recently announced that it was introducing the system in order to identify students and thereby reduce waste and the threat of impersonation. Of course. No. With the new scanners, the students are able to have their meals deducted from their account. Convenience. Upon scanning their palms as they march single file into the feeding lines during lunchtime. Of course, this type of technology is not new to Pinellas County. The students have been finger scanning in order to gain access to their lunch for years. So they've been using fingerprints. Now they're vein scanning. Naturally, these days, not everyone is worried about the intrusive nature of turning one's body into a password to be mined by algorithms for corporations and governments, but just as legitimately about having their financial data hacked. No worries, says the developer of the newest form of vein scanning, Stahler. Stahler. S-T-H-A-L-E-R. Stahler. That's a weird name, isn't it? Stahler. Sounds vaguely fascistic. Stahler. Although company director Simon Binns manages to sound creepy and objectifying even while trying to reassure the vein scanning public. This is what he has to say. This is the safest form of biometrics. There are no known incidences where this security has been breached. When you put your finger in the scanner, it checks you are alive. It checks for a pulse. It checks for hemoglobin. Your vein pattern is secure because it is kept on an encrypted form as binary numbers. So you are being turned. Your blood, your pulsing, vein throbbing, hemoglobin rich blood is being turned into zeros and ones, and you don't even have to have one single drop extracted from you. The concept is mind-boggling. The reduction of life, blood, the thing that pumps through us all. Doesn't matter what color your skin is, we all have blood. It may be different. You may have that Rh negative alien blood, but it's still in there. Still get your vein scanned. Simon goes on to say, no card details are stored with the retailer or ourselves. It is held with WorldPay. In the same way it is when you buy online. So guess what? You got to put money. You got to put money into WorldPay. Yeah. And there's going to have to be one centralized system for your credits to flow into. There can't be competing systems. Oh, I think I'll go with Cashflush instead of WorldPay because I actually get a better interest rate on Cashflush. Now that's just not going to happen, right? It's not going to happen because the world is moving towards centralization. Cash is decentralized. Right? It is, for the most part, anonymous, but we know it can be traced. So pay attention to WorldPay, because if this is a default holder of your your biometric, right, of your biometric information, then WorldPay actually has to have some role to play in storing your assets. Now, I suppose your bank could act as the place where you store your assets, and WorldPay is a third-party client which acts as an interface between your vein and your bank. But wouldn't it just be more convenient if the banks themselves were eliminated and there was one centralized system for everybody to use their vein safely, securely, and of course conveniently? System developers are projecting that adoption of the technology will be rapid. Perhaps thousands of stores, nightclubs, and membership services getting on board in the near future. The question is, will it be optional? And if so, for how long? And Tuberville said this 6 years ago. It should be noted that almost every element of any control grid begins by being optional when it is first introduced to the target population. But as more and more individuals acquiesce to the system, the more inconvenient and subsequently the harder it will become for the rest of us to opt out. Eventually the ability to opt out will be removed altogether, and that is true. You can bank on it with WorldPay, of course. Well, with that, we reach the end of today's show. However, as we always do here, try to leave you with something enlightening or interesting, at the very least, somewhat inspiring. And I have to go back to the conference that I was at on Saturday and Sunday. And one of the things that came out of that conference, number one, is the fact that people actually got to see each other, meet each other face to face. And there is such an exchange of endorphins and complex neuropeptides and neurotransmissions. I mean, it was almost intoxicating to be around people. It was like, oh my God, for me at least, I don't know about anybody else, but for me at least, it was incredible to be around people. And to be around people that were, to some degree, engaged in various aspects of either research or interest or, kind of cracking open what's behind the scenes. And it was all there. Like the paranormal people have their own version of it. The UFO people have their own version of it. The truth people have their own version of it. Spiritual people, I think everybody's theoretically spiritual. But sometimes the spiritual people, the New Age people get, like I haven't been around a conversation about ascension in a long time. But it was clearly being bandied about and talked about. Ascension this, ascension that, ascension symptoms. I just, if somebody can explain ascension to me, and you can leave it on the YouTube comments, that would be wonderful. Do we ascend to another plane of existence? Are we vibrating at such a high rate that our vibrational world splits off and we're living in 5D? Is that what the ascension model is? I mean, that's what I thought it was. I could be completely wrong. But I was very intrigued by people still talking about ascension. Nonetheless, the great thing about that conference is that people saw each other. We were not zeros and ones. We were not running our fingers across anything to open a mind, open a mouth, or open a heart. No. For 48 hours, we were organic, analog, biological for the most part. I think some people might have had implants in them. Entities that were connecting, communing in this glorious mix of what we call interaction. It was incredible. Now I know, hey, it's a group. It could be any group. It could be Shriners. It could be communists, right? Whatever. It's a group. And there's something still very powerful about being across from somebody in physical space. Being at a table with a group of people, eating, sharing food, ideas, laughter. It's one of the keystones of being human. So I want to leave you with that and my experience and my feeling around it. In the midst of a time where our blood is reduced to zeros and ones, this is the same blood, right? I mean, theoretically, think about this. I'm going to go off into a kind of a religious place now, / spiritual, right? But theoretically, this is like the same blood that Jesus, Yeshua, Emmanuel, shed on that cross, right? I mean, the whole idea of that moment is that that blood is an act, a planetary act of transubstantiation. And then from that moment forward, right, we are all imbued at a quantum level with that event and with that potentiality. You see, that's what that was all about. And everything on the planet, every rock, every animal, every insect, every reptile, every molecule of water, everything was imbued with the same subatomic quantum transformation. This was the seed. This was the seed of the Christ consciousness that was planted in all of us from that moment forward, right? I mean, theoretically, even if you just get into religious terms, strict religious, maybe they don't go as far as getting into the plants and the rocks and the paramecium and all that stuff, right? That's what that event was about. And from a quantum level, we all have that codex inside of us, right? And then we reduce it to zeros and ones. We reduce this magnificent thing, this life force, this blood, this sacrament inside of us, and we reduce it to zeros and ones. That is a travesty. That is an absolute travesty. And this is the greatest sin that we'll suffer, I believe, which is for convenience sake, ultimately. Hey, we got the autumnal equinox coming up here tomorrow and Saturday, and it's a big time, right? The 23rd. Speaking of religion, we've got the crown in Leo and then the belt in Virgo giving birth. You know what was really interesting? Have you noticed like the last two hurricanes? Jose and Maria. Have you seen that? Right? Who are Jose and Maria? It's Joseph and Mary. Joseph and Mary are the last two hurricanes that have commingled in the Caribbean, and to the people in Puerto Rico. I don't know if I have any listeners down there, but apparently the entire island is without power. I mean, these hurricanes really have been more devastating in some. I mean, it was pretty devastating in Houston, but more devastating to the Caribbean than certainly to Florida, and maybe not necessarily Houston, but these are very small islands, and many of these people just don't have a lot to begin with. So the Caribbean is being gutted by these hurricanes. Anyway, this is the solstice. I'm sorry, the autumnal equinox coming up here, 22nd, 23rd. 23rd, of course, we have the big event in the sky, and then we have the eclipse coming up after that. So use the next 2 days to get really clear on your intention. And if you can spend some time just in I'm going to spend some time just being quiet. I'm going to eschew college football for a few hours on Saturday and try to get into that energy. And tomorrow I will not be doing the show because some of you may know that tomorrow is my birthday, so I'm going to take the day off, kind of get into this equinox mode. All right. Extended player here today, almost an hour. Took us a while to get cooking, but I think we got there. You know the drill. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay when it's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. Have a great Thursday, and I'll see you guys on Sunday night for the live stream.